lawyers, judges, etc. of Reddit, what's the dumbest thing you've heard someone try to legally justify? Story 1. Buddy working graveyard shift at a gas station got robbed. Police caught the guys, he had to testify as a witness, and I had to drive him to court, so I hung out in the courtroom during the trial. One of the guys, acting as his own defense attorney, called the other guy to the stand and asked him, when we robbed that gas station, was I there? The whole courtroom face-bombed. Story 2. I was on a jury for a case in which someone was being tried for assaulting a police officer. There was a chase, during which the cop slipped and broke his foot. After the suspect was caught, the officer told his partner he thought his foot was broken. The suspect then shouted, "Fuck that foot," and stomped on the officer's broken foot. His defense claimed that he simply slipped and landed on the cop's foot by accident, and his exclamation of "fuck that foot" was simply a coincidence. This defense attorney also fell asleep during the trial and was literally snoring audibly until the judge stopped the trial to reprimand him. Story 3. Trying to get out of paying his bill at a restaurant because he ordered a single beer, which altered his mental capacity, thereby negating his capacity to enter into a binding contract when presented with his credit card receipt for signature. Story 4. I had a guy call me to tell me he wasn't going to be in court because he was getting his hair cut. I asked him if he was serious. He said yes. I told him he was going to have an order for his arrest out if he didn't appear. He hung up. Story 5. Standard. Not a lawyer, but my lawyer who was defending me for a speeding ticket family friend gave me the option to stay with him and watch his defense of his second case because he said it would be a good one. My lawyer buddy was defending a man who was brought up on his 6th DUI charge. Now the lawyer explained to me that there is no way that he could win this case because, let's face it, the judge does not really have sympathy on the 6th go-around. The lawyer's hand was forced, and he decided to have a bit of fun with it. His opening statement: "We are here due to Mr. XXX's 6th DUI charge, and I think we can all look around this room, and deep down at ourselves and ask who hasn't been there." The judge thought it was pretty funny, but the prosecution was really pissed off. Story 6. I work for car insurance. Someone hit a parked car and tried to tell me it wasn't their fault. "The car is parked, sir. It was a bright day and in a parking lot." "Well, yeah, but it was in my way." Story 7. Completely not what you're looking for, but I love telling this story. A couple years ago I saw a purse snatching on a Friday night in the East Village. The East Village is busy as on a Friday night, and there were a good 6 guys, myself included, ready to tackle this guy. No idea what he was thinking, but someone tackles him. The guy gets up, throws the purse down and says, "It wasn't me, it wasn't even me," literally right after we all watched it happen and the guy get tackled. What a moron. Story 8. My friend's father is a defense attorney, and one of his stories always made me laugh. He was defending a man who had broken into a store. I think it was a convenience store. His plan was to sneak onto the roof of the building and break in through a trapdoor, or something. The roof was bad, and so during his planned robbery he fell through the roof, landed on the counter in front of the woman who owned the store, and was promptly apprehended. In court, the woman was asked to identify the man who had attempted to rob her store. She pointed directly to the suspect, saying it was him. Hearing this, the man jumps up and shouts, "Your Honor, that's impossible. There's no way she could have seen it was me. I was covered in soot." He lost the case. Edit spellings. Story 9. My grandpa is a lawyer. He once took a case from a woman who sued someone for calling her ugly. I can't even begin to imagine what led her to believe she would win that one. Story 10. Pretty much all sovereign citizens' arguments. American law doesn't run on the open sesame principle where a few magic words will open legal backdoors, but the best was a client electing to go pro-SE and claimed immunity via a Native American treaty. Although the treaty had expired in the 1870s, he wasn't a Native American. He said he was adopted in jail by someone of that tribe, and the treaty's terms didn't grant him immunity anyway. His argument failed, and he's looking at 150 years just in enhancements for 12 armed robberies and a bunch of assaults with no good defense on the facts. Story 11. I was charged with assaulting a police officer. Without a warrant, the police, who had been called to my neighbor's house, broke into my house while I was sleeping. They handcuffed me, beat me and pushed me head first down a flight of stairs still cuffed. I was charged because the cop who pushed me down the stairs injured himself in the process. Story 12. I was once on a jury for a criminal case. Dude was caught selling drugs out of a property on Shirley Street. He was obviously trying to prove that he did not own the property, however had Shirley tatted on one forearm and Street on the other. He lost. Story 13. I am not a lawyer, but I once sat in court for a probation violation hearing where I watched someone try to justify failing a UA for cocaine. His defense: "I wasn't using cocaine, Your Honor, I was just rocking it up to sell. That's how it got in my system." Instead of just admitting he had a problem with coke and going to treatment, he blatantly admitted to distributing crack cocaine. He went back to prison. I also once saw a PV hearing where a guy had gotten a violation for missing his appointment with his probation officer. His excuse: he was an illegal immigrant and had been deported and therefore unable to attend. It checked out. He also went back to prison though. Edit for clarity. Story 14. Guy in traffic court in the case of speeding. "How do you plea?" "I refuse to plea." "What do you mean?" "Texas Driver's Code of Conduct is not a legislative law of the land. It's a contractual agreement that does not apply to me, for I am not a driver as defined by the state of Texas as a person who operates a motor vehicle in a commercial capacity. I am a traveler operating my private conveyance on public road, and I do not need your permission to do so, nor am I subject to your commercial code of conduct. Judge, ordinarily you'd be correct, however, you have a driver's license and in that voluntary contract you agreed to abide by our codes and policies and be subject to our jurisdiction, and since you offer no evidence in your defense and instead want to argue legal semantics, I find you guilt in the amount of $255. Thank you, Your Honor. May I discharge my debt to the state with yet another obligation? I beg your pardon. Can I pay you with an IOU or script drawn upon a private bank? No, thank you, Your Honor. Then what am I to pay you with? Cash? You get it at the bank. I'm very sorry, Your Honor, but I've been to the bank, and they don't have dollar bills. All they have are Federal Reserve notes, which legally are instruments of debt and carry with it an equity attachment. Since I can't discharge my debt to the state with yet another paper obligation, what am I to pay you with? Gold and silver. You can pay me with either. Thank you, Your Honor. Can you please explain to the court how 1 is equal to 38? I beg your pardon. Well, you see, Your Honor, it takes 38 as these green dollars to buy one of these silver dollars. And you said that I can discharge my debt to the state with 255 of either. So can you please explain for the court record and my benefit, how you consider the two are equal? The judge stands up and bangs the gavel and yells, you go sit down with the prosecutor, and whatever he comes up with, I am gonna sign. Story 15. My friend's dad sued a dentist. The dentist took the stand and proudly said, I've been practicing dentistry for 25 years. My friend's dad couldn't resist. Practicing for 25 years, and you still can't do it right. Story 16. A guy came into my office and asked me to sue the sheriff and the prosecutor in this small town for wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution, respectively. The reason he was arrested was because he is a convicted offender and he went to a grade school to have lunch with his niece and nephew. He was arrested for being a registered offender while loitering in a community safety zone. He said that loitering was defined as staying without a clear purpose, and his purpose was to have lunch with his niece and nephew. He was convicted and sent to jail. He appealed, lost the appeal, fled a civil lawsuit against the county, lost that, and wanted me to appeal the lawsuit. Story 17. Not me, not even a lawyer, but a friend of mine who was working at the public defender's office while in law school. He was tasked with coming up with something to give a client a good faith defense. The problem being that the accused was caught on video beating a corrections officer nearly to death and permanently blinding the CO in one eye. Dead to rights, the DA decided to throw the book at the guy and charge the defendant with riot in a penal institution. After duly checking the chain of evidence all in order, and making sure there wasn't even the barest hint that the defendant had reason to believe he was defending himself, there wasn't, but he thought, well, it's just one guy, is that really a riot? But yes, one person can indeed be a riot, but you see, a county jail in the statute of that state is not considered a penal institution, so the dumbest thing he's ever seen someone try to get away with in a courtroom was something he himself did. When the date of the trial came, he and the public defender stood up and demanded that the charges be dropped. The DA and the very visibly crippled for life CO contained their incredulous outbursts of outrage, and the judge asks why. Your Honor, the jail is not a penal institution. My friend says what followed was an hour long in my chambers. Now, session where both prosecution and defense were given a thorough reaming by the judge for the gross miscarriage of justice, but the charges were dropped. Story 18. A woman was going to take a course to obtain career skills. Her instructor died, and she did not take the course. Then, she was hurt in a rollerblading accident and later tried to claim loss of income for the job she would have had if she had taken the course, and successfully gotten the job. Story 19. Having tens of thousands of dollars cash at home while claiming state benefits and working under the table for cash, but the state gave me the money, and any of the other reasons I hear for driving drunk, beating a wife or former life partner, failing to pay fines, etc. I can't afford to pay my fines, but I just bought a horse and horse trailer. Story 20. In a New Zealand case for discrimination, a judge found that the law only allowing straight people to marry was not discriminatory to the lesbian couples who bought the case. Why? Because two people of the opposite, i.e., two men, couldn't marry, so it wasn't discriminatory on grounds of gender. And this is my favorite bit, because two straight women couldn't marry each other, either it wasn't discriminatory on grounds of sexuality. Something tells me the judge may have had his own agenda. Story 21. I am a law student, and I spent the summer interning with a small-town prosecutor. There were some gems. One woman's defense for kicking an old man on the bus was that it was self-defense because he invaded her spiritual vagina by sitting on the bus. There was another repeat offender that I will call Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is a mean old man that lives up in the hills and refuses to pay taxes, among other illegal acts, because he claims that his land is a sovereign nation called Jonesville. Every time he gets arrested for letting his horses run free, a crime in my state, building a fence across a public road, threatening passersby with a gun, etc. He handwrites briefs to the court on Republic of Jonesville stationery. Each one is a rambling manifesto about how he isn't subject to state law, and how the prosecutors have it out for old Mr. Jones. There's a filing cabinet measuring about 5 by 3 by 3 in the prosecutor's office filled with this man's incoherent chicken scratch writing. For the record, this kind of defense doesn't work. It's the legal equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ears and yelling la 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 la. Then the judge promptly says guilty and sentences you to anger management classes.
Story 22. Best offre le gala de vis par une par deux.
Story 23. Got called in for jury duty one time. There was a couple dozen of us in the trial room being vetted to choose 12 of us for the case. They come up to one kid, had to have been just 18 years old. The prosecutor is going through the same questions Shed asked everyone else. Then she comes up with an unexpected question. Do you recall what you placed on your jury summons form for your occupation? He replied that he didn't recall. Turns out that he put pimp as his occupation. She raked him over the coals about it, talking about how it was perjury to falsify the information. Talked about the fines and jail time he could face. The whole 9 yards. She closed with, therefore I wish to dismiss Fred Smith from this jury. He either knowingly perjured himself on the juror forms, or is engaged felonious activities by coordinating prostitution, which is illegal in this state. The kid was either very dumb or had some pretty large jewels in order to do that. He's lucky he didn't end with a fine or something, or maybe he did after the fact. Ultimately 12 jurors were selected before my number was called, and I decided to go back to work rather than sit and watch the case. Story 24. A woman cold called me and wanted to sue the Los Angeles Times for an article that ran 22 years ago. The article was about homeless people in Los Angeles. It did not name her, or show her picture, but she said people could tell that it was talking about her, and that it was harmful to her reputation. Story 25. This court uses a flag with gold fringe. Gold fringe means this court is international. An international court needs to enforce maritime law. Under maritime law, I am a vessel. The woman declared herself to be a boat. Story 26. During a work comp hearing for a former employee, he said he was leaning back in his chair and hit his forehead on his desk. Judge said, you know that is physically impossible. Employee said, no it isn't, look I have a bump right here, we won. Story 27. I thought of one more. I don't know if it actually got to court. Guy doesn't want to drill a hole in his nice car to affix his front license plate, and he doesn't want to put it in the approved location in the windshield. Instead, he rubber banded it to the passenger's sun visor. He got pulled over, told the cop he had never heard of that requirement, and got a warning to put the plate in an approved place. 3 months later, he got pulled over, told the cop he had never heard of that requirement. The cop ran his record and found the warning, and wrote him a ticket. He asked me if I knew a lawyer who would guarantee that he could get him off. Story 28. A friend's uncle had his house broken into, and he ended up beating up the intruder. Later in court they asked him if he felt in danger, to which he replied, nah, I knew I could take him. He was eventually convinced to reply, yes, I felt my life threatened so he wouldn't get in trouble. Story 29. Goodness me, any of the freemen on the land or similar pseudo-legal woo. In a nutshell, the theory is loosely based on the social contract theory of the legitimacy of state authority, and has as its central idea that the government police tax office has to actually enter into a contract with you if it wants to make you subject to a law. This is, of course, mental, and can have quite sad consequences for vulnerable people who get taken in by the theory and try to get out of paying their council tax, for instance. There are, however, a lot of frankly hilarious theories involving legal persons, bizarre configurations of punctuation and capital letters in names, words with double meanings depending on whether a citizen or policeman is using them, and, most amazingly, nautical terminology. Here is a video of some freemen not understanding that what they are trying to do doesn't work and breaking the law by filming in a courtroom in the process. And here's a video of a freeman very much discovering that what he is trying to do doesn't work. TLDR. Freeman on the land. Story 30. I was in a courtroom watching a public defender defend her client. The dude was in jail for other crimes, but was in court that day for trespassing. The poor public defender had to try and defend this guy, as he had pleaded not guilty. Her argument was that the arresting officer had no idea whether or not the man was literate, therefore he shouldn't have arrested the man as it was possible the man couldn't read the trespassing signs. Story 31. The woman who claimed that the injury my client caused made it impossible for her to fulfill her dream of going to medical school and becoming a physician, thus causing her tremendous loss of income. She decided on going to medical school because her middle initials were MD. Of course, since she dropped out of high school in the 9th grade, after failing all her classes, she had to get her GED before attending college and before applying to medical school. Story 32. I once worked on a case where the mother kicked one of the kids out of her house, but still wouldn't consent to my client the father having custody. The same case also involved my go-to story for these threads, where the other lawyer took a cell phone call right while he was in the middle of making his closing argument to the judge. Story 33. I was in a courtroom waiting for my case to be called, but had to wait for a small claims trial to wrap up. A guy sued a restaurant because the restaurant charged him $7 for a sandwich that was $5 during early special hours. The guy stated he ordered the sandwich at noon, but the early prices were from 4 to 6 p.m. The judge asked why he thought he should get the sandwich for $5 when it wasn't during early hours. The guy said it was earlier than early, so they should honor that price. What a great freaking use of judicial time and resources. Story 34. In my experience, a lot of the best stories come up in traffic court because everyone represents themselves and don't know what they're doing. Where I live, new drivers get a learner's permit and require a fully licensed driver to sit in the front passenger seat when they are driving. I prosecuted a kid with learner's permit who was driving a group of his friends, but the kid in the front seat didn't have a license. He testified that there was someone in the back with a full license. When I asked why he let the kid without a license sit in the front instead of the fully licensed driver, he said, well, he called shotgun. I mean, what are you gonna do? Story 35. Witnessed in an AZ courtroom underage consumption of alcohol case. Juvenile defendant and her mother decided to represent themselves in court. Prosecutor. The officer's report states you admitted to drinking the beer that was found in your hand, yet you plead not guilty. Why? Girl. Well, I only sipped it. It wasn't even a tablespoon full. More like a quarter of a spoonful. Judge, so do you want to change your plea to guilty? Girl, I'm not guilty, it wasn't even that much. Judge, you realize the law reads not a drop of alcohol. Girl, I'm not guilty. Judge, guilty. Next case. Story 36. I was observing a court case while an intern and I witnessed a public defense attorney whip out stuffed animals and make a baffling nonsensical defense of her client while playing with them. I couldn't follow WTF she was saying, but at one point she had a pink elephant chasing the aqua bear. It was ridiculous. Story 37. A woman said she wasn't guilty of driving with a suspended license because witchcraft made her drive. She also said she didn't need a public defender because God was her lawyer. Story 38. I did an internship thingy, I think that's the word, not sure, at a court when in school, and some 17-year-old girl stabbed and slaughtered her boyfriend 13 times. He survived. I don't know how, especially not after I've seen the pictures of the injuries, because he didn't want to go buy cigarettes. She used this as a legit argument, and kept saying things like if he doesn't do what I want I should be allowed to punish him for it. Story 39. Sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. But wait, you haven't heard my reason for doing it yet. Sigh. Okay, why did you do it? Because I felt like it. Story 40. Anal. But I have spent a fair amount of time watching Judge Judy and the People's Court. The dumbest plaintiff I ever saw was one who scraped her car against a parked RV and then sued the owner of the RV. She even said, I told him he shouldn't park his RV there. I told him if he parked it there, I might run into it, and I was right. Plaintiff thought the RV was too wide and shouldn't be allowed on a residential street, but in fact it was within the legal limit and was legally parked. The judge found for the defendant. He said if you know a hazard is there, and you don't avoid it, that is the definition of negligence. Story 41. Not a lawyer or judge, but some girl's dad tried to sue my younger sister who was about 12 at the time for accidentally hitting a tennis ball at the girl's face while playing tennis, from the opposite side of the court. It was so ridiculous that the media found out and we were all over the news. Even the premier made a speech about us. It turned into a huge debate, i.e., how are our children supposed to play proper sports, have fun, if everyone's just going to go around suing each other over a tiny injury? Story 42. I once had to sue my former roommate for $1,200 for not paying the last month of the lease's rent and the bills from the last 2 months. She tried to say that she slid the money in cash under my bedroom door. She also tried to counter-sue for her portion of the down payment. We didn't get the down payment back, and I had actually spent a few hundred doing repairs to things she had damaged, all of which I had photo proof and receipts. Story 43. Ooh, easy. I had a $17 million deal that had been pending for months. Day at supposed finance. Someone finds a 0.04 discrepancy between 2 documents. Easy fix, right? Apparently not. The billable hours that the attorneys justified emailing, calling, and ranting about those 0.04 are easily the dumbest thing I've seen anyone legally justify. Story 44. I used to prosecute local code violations. I had a guy tell me he didn't own a house anymore because he didn't want it, so he's not responsible for the building code violations. He said I moved out. It's not mine, it belongs to the bank now. Me, sir, your name is the last recorded deed. Under the law in this state, you need to have compelling evidence you no longer own the house, which you haven't shown me. Him, it belongs to the bank. Me, which bank? There's no mortgage on this property. Him, you're stupid. Don't you know how this works? If you move into a house and then you don't want it anymore, then you can leave and the bank takes it. Me, but there has to be a mortgage. There's no bank with an interest on this property. Him, banks just take empty properties. They do it all the time. Me, so you're saying some bank owns the property now because you abandoned it, even though there's no mortgage. Him sighs loudly. Yes. Me, okay, you go ahead and explain that to the judge. It didn't go well for him. Story 45. I can have visitors in my home twice a month. Anything more than twice a month is a violation of the county zoning code. This rule does not apply, say, to people getting together to watch football games on TV every Sunday, but it applies to me. Story 46. Lawyer here. I worked on a case while at an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office where some guy was facing criminal fraud, theft, and other charges. He was trying to get morphine from a pharmacy with a stolen prescription pad and a forged doctor's note on it. The note, it said Mo fine £1. This fine gentleman was attempting to obtain a pound of morphine from a pharmacy with a misspelled doc's note on a stolen script pad. Story 47. I once watched a stripper defend herself in Dallas County Court back in the summer of 2012 for possession of decent amount of weed. She actually used the phrase most crimes are solved within the first 48 hours like the TV show. She then proceeded, in an attempt to nullify the evidence against her, to argue that because the weed wasn't tested within 48 hours the evidentiary trail had gone cold and she couldn't be convicted. I have never seen a more full gallery than at that trial. God bless that skinny moron. Story 48. My boss, an attorney, was watching a murder trial. The defendant was on the stand and the prosecutor asked him if owned a 38. He replied yeah, but that's not the one I got him with. Story 49. When I was clerking there was a suit brought by a prison inmate against another inmate at different prison. Allegedly, Prisoner 1 and Prisoner 2 had contracted for Prisoner 1 to write a romance novel for which Prisoner 2 would pay money. The novel was entitled Elements of the Game. The case was dismissed before a copy of the novel, if there ever was one, made it into the record. I was really looking forward to reading it. Story 50. Crim Pro class, and our instructor was also a defense attorney and taught in his free time. He told me the judge asked him how drunk his client was during the act and my prof said sober as a judge, Your Honor. He said the judge burst out laughing, and he said he risked contempt but would have hated himself for the rest of his life if he didn't say it. Story 51. I worked with a man who had been caught cheating on his wife in several rooms in their house, and even had proof on camera, who had decided to file for divorce. His friend had given him some advice to use in court. It was very simple, but wasn't very helpful. He told his friend to tell the jury that, it wasn't me. Story 52. Judge, what's your reasoning for contesting the blown stop sign ticket? Girl, the cop wrote the wrong intersection on the ticket. Judge, regardless. Did you blow the stop sign where the officer saw you? Girl, yes I did, but still he made a mistake on the ticket. Judge, guilty. Girl, the system sucks. Story 53. At a will reading where the deceased left everything to one of his 2 children, the disinherited child tried to argue that under the principle of equal protection, he was entitled to half of the estate. Story 54. Not really dumb, but kinda ridiculously funny. We had a client who had the longest record. He had nothing good to show the judge mitigating factors during sentencing. Basically, he was just a rebel without a cause, a man lacking a moral compass. However, in his past, he had a legal matter go up to the Court of Appeal of Ontario, second highest court in Canada, highest in Ontario, so during sentencing, I advocated that he has added to this great nation's legal jurisprudence. Judge had a laugh. He still got jail, but probably less than he would have without the submission. He's deported now. Story 55. I recall hearing a story of a man who bought a box of expensive cigars, possibly Cubans, and had them insured. Then after he smoked them he filed a claim on them. The insurance company sued him for multiple cases of arson. Story 56. My aunt was a paralegal like 10 years ago. She was helping with this case where this guy raped a woman while he was hospitalized. He then tried suing the hospital because security failed to stop him from doing so. Story 57. Tangentially related. I knew a guy growing up, the older brother of a friend, who wasn't really all that bright. He got pulled over for driving erratically, and it turned out that not only was he drunk, he didn't even have a valid license. He was ordered to attend court on a couple of charges. Fast forward to his court date. The judge, this guy's lawyer and the prosecution are standing outside the courthouse before the trial. My friend's brother drives up in full view and parks out the front of the courthouse. He still didn't have a license. Story 58. Had a client, young black male defendant, tell the judge, at sentencing, that he should be given leniency because since Obama was elected, the standards for black men are too high. With genius like that, it's no wonder even our idiot police force solved the crime within hours of commission. Story 59. I'm not a lawyer, but I was sitting in the courtroom the day this happened, and since it was a very small town I knew the couple. So anyway, guys gets a DUI, gets fancy old school lawyer. Lawyer calls trooper to stand, ask why he pulled guy over. He was all over the road. Trooper gets down, guy comes up. Lawyer asks why were you driving crazy? Guy says GF she's a big time was preforming a act on him. Lawyer says to courtroom, and we all know how girl has her tongue pierced. Judge dismissed case. It was always rumored that the lawyer was in good with the local judges. He got my dad off a DUI because he was wearing cowboy boots and had knee problems. Reason he failed field test and he never crossed the lines on the road. So a legal stop. Yes, I was there for that one too. I sat in on a court case where the defendant had been running his business without a license and had been shut down because of it and fined thousands of pounds, which had left him in some financial difficulty. He was in court because he had failed to make redundancy payments to his ex-employees, and his lawyer was arguing that if he had not broken the law, he would not have been able to employ anyone. Therefore anyone he was employing at the time were there as a result of a crime, and paying them redundancy pay would in effect be allowing them to benefit financially from a crime. The judge actually said something along the lines of "Are you serious?" and the lawyer quickly withdrew from that line of defense. Story 60. Had a guy who was charged with assaulting an officer after jumping the subway turnstile, came to the hearing with a public defender who is actually pretty skilled, denied it all, claimed that the officer was more or less harassing him and his buddies. Then the prosecutor shows the videotape. You clearly see the defendant climbing the turnstile, the officer catching him and his friends, throwing them out, and the defendant then delivers a football kick to the officers when he has his back turned. The defender asks for a short break. Clearly he hasn't seen the evidence before and his client wasn't telling him the whole story. They come back in and admits the kick but claims self-defense. Didn't work. Another guy was caught at a club with a gun in his sock. Claimed it was given to him by a friend earlier that night and that he was going to turn it in to the police. Didn't work. Story 61. In the case there had been a bar fight. A surveillance camera video clearly showed the perpetrator hitting the victim in the head with a heavy beer mug, overhead swing. The perpetrator claimed that she had just tried to place the mug on the table. Story 62. This guy was walking his grandmother's dog and got ticketed because the dog wasn't licensed. In court the guy couldn't wrap his mind around the problem. He kept repeating, "But the dog doesn't need a license. I drove us there." Story 63. I was an alternate juror in a case where a guy worked for a small company. He was a telecommuter who lived and worked in North Carolina. The small company offered a Maryland-only health insurance policy, which he purchased. The Maryland-only health insurance did not have any North Carolina doctors in its coverage group, so all of his medical bills were covered at the lower out-of-policy rate. He sued, not the insurance company, not the employer, but the employer's insurance broker. As an alternate juror, I was not in the deliberations and I don't know how the case ended up. Story 64. Not a legal professional, But during my time as an unpaid wage incentive volunteer, I ran into more than a fair share of BS. A lot of claimant was driving 60 in a 45 when suddenly and without warning a granddad collided on foot with the claimant's vehicle. I should note that this was an ambulance chasing firm, and they are one of the key reasons why car insurance is so high. Story 65 dealing with this right now. Our demurrer was successful after the initial complaint, arguing the plaintiff basically failed to state any actionable claim. The plaintiff then files an amended complaint that is virtually unchanged. Pretty sure I'm just going to submit our exact motion again and it's going to be dismissed. Story 66 not a lawyer, but had someone try to get a restraining order against me because I sent her 2 text messages. One asking how she was, one apologizing for contacting her after an angry response. 6 months after Wed argued and Shed told me not to contact her. Her grounds for the order were harassment. I laughed. Story 67 my favorite was when the woman ran her husband over with a car because he called her when they were drunk. Yes, she was driving drunk as well. Luckily I was representing the husband. Story 68 I'm not a lawyer, but work for a car rental company. I once had a guy call me to say he was going to go sue us because he got a speeding ticket he didn't want to pay for. Why? Because the GPS said another speed limit. Story 69 this isn't something that someone was trying to legally just, but it was just the stupidest thing I had ever heard in court. My brother's court case was right after, so I sat in for the last bit of the court case prior to his. I heard the judge sentence a month to 40 hours of community service. He then stood up, outraged, screaming, just throw me back in jail for the rest of my life. Just sentence me to death already. I didn't think community service was that bad. Story 70 back when I first started college majoring in criminal justice. One of my assignments was to go to local courthouse and sit in on about 3 to 5 cases and take notes, meet the judge, etc. Anyway, I'm sitting in the back there after I had met the judge and in walks a buddy of mine from high school. He was never the brightest kid, but he was always nice. But apparently he was there because he had tried to sell pot to an off-duty officer. So, after all the preliminary bullshit was said, in walks the cop fully uniformed and everything. The whole trial goes on for about 20 minutes because the kid kept saying, I don't understand, I didn't actually make the sale, I never got any money and the pot never left my hand, why am I here? This went back and forth between the judge and the defendant for about a good 15 minutes before the judge stopped trying to explain the issue and issued him 30 days parole and 160 hours of community service. Every other person in the room were just facepalming and I just sat there and felt bad for him. TLDR kid was on the stand for trying to sell pot to a cop, kept saying that he didn't make the sale and never received money so he shouldn't be getting punished.